I'm not sure where Philip the unsure one came from. I've seen some things in some commentaries that maybe don't totally agree with, some conclusions maybe some folks have drawn about Philip, but we'll talk about some of those and some other characteristics of his. But the icebreaker question tonight said you're assigned to two different people for a group project. One is an impulsive go-getter who works fast, a Peter type. The other is a methodical, questioning person who pays attention to details, a Philip type. What are the benefits of having both of these people on your crew? Project managers, HR managers, project leaders.
They keep each other on their toes.
They what?
They keep each other on their toes.
They keep each other on their toes, okay? Yeah. As long as the personalities mesh okay, then the difference in their approach is not bad.
You have one to keep them on task and to keep things moving along, and the other one to make sure nothing drops in the cracks.
All right. One keeps you on the task, and the other one makes sure nothing falls through the cracks. That's a good point. Yeah, I've had both of those, and sometimes people like the go-getter because he's getting things done. You see some action, you see something going on, and his intentions may be good, but sometimes important details may get overlooked because he's in maybe a rush, going too quickly. Sometimes the go-getter type doesn't have all the information they need to make a good decision about the things that are going on. Yeah, sometimes they can be an encouragement to each other. They can, although those personalities are somewhat opposites. Sometimes they don't get along well just because of the difference in their plan of attack. The guy that's the Peter type, may not stay in his lane. Because sometimes he may start running over, you're not getting the stuff done fast enough, so I'm going to work on your part too. And so we see that sometimes as well. But the Philip type, as he talks about here, may show the appearance of not getting anything done because he's being methodical and slow with this. And slow is not always bad. It depends on why things appear to be slow. He may ask so many questions, he gets lost in the details. So you keep digging down into things and chasing rabbits, and then get to the point of become overwhelmed by so much that seeing the whole project instead of focusing on the task maybe that he's been assigned to take care of. He may get completely off the path because of getting into some of those details and, well, this is interesting, let's go look at this and look at this and look at this, and hard to get back on focus to what needs to be done. The old expression of analysis paralysis, that you spend so much time trying to analyze this thing and figure out what to do that you don't get anything done because you can't make a decision. So being able to make a decision and move on is certainly a part of that. But each of those has its advantages. The one that is a little more concerned with the details may wind up with a better understanding of the whole project than the one that's just trying to hammer away and really get through with the part he's got to do. Now, how can that apply to our spiritual work and working together as Christians?
Tim, I think one of the things that I've had to learn, and it's been a good lesson for me, having all different types of personalities, knowledge levels, and things like that can be very, very helpful in different experiences on the team, especially to complement one another rather than don't necessarily fight one another. But as Christians, we ought to complement each other well.
Yeah.
And get a lot more done that way.
Yeah. Yep, we've had some discussions here recently about being all members of the one body, but we're different members, just like our body has eyes and ears and feet and hands and whatever. Then each one of those fills its own role. Well, the same way with that in the church as a spiritual body, every member has its role. Not everyone works at the same speed. Not everyone learns at the same speed. So we have to be conscious of that and to help those along who might need some help. We just think about the fact that some are preachers, some are elders, some are teachers, some are women, some are men, some are babes in Christ, some are mature Christians, and all of those are going to be somewhat different in their approach to things and the way that they would handle this, and needing to work together to make sure that the job gets done and that everyone comes along. One of my customers up in Cincinnati, the president of that group up there, he said, you come along every year, you fire the bottom 10% and shoot the stragglers and carry the wounded. But the shoot the stragglers and carry the wounded, we don't want to shoot each other, but sometimes you have to carry the wounded. Sometimes you have to help each other, bear one another's burdens, and do that. And so these different personalities need to work together. Just to try to get to thinking a little bit about different personalities, because it's a lot of what we will see tonight in this lesson. There are two Philips mentioned in the New Testament. Why is the Philip noted in Acts 6 clearly different than the Apostle Philip?
Because the apostles needed to designate other men to do the things that were taken away from their work. So you would not designate a man who was already an apostle to take a servant's position.
All right, the apostles needed help to take care of that particular problem at the time. Philip was one of those that was selected to do that. From the two passages there, Acts chapter 8 and chapter 21, how do we know that this was not Philip the apostle there in Acts chapter 8 that went down to Samaria?
The apostles, once they learned Samaria, received the word, had to go to Samaria to lay their hands on them so they could receive the Holy Spirit.
All right, yeah. There were two things there. One, in chapter 8, verse 1, it says that Saul was in agreement with the putting Stephen to death, and on that day a great persecution began in the church at Jerusalem, and they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. So they stayed in Jerusalem at that point. Get down a few verses later in Acts chapter 8 rather, down at verse 12, it says, when they believed Philip preaching the good news about the kingdom, they were baptized, men and women alike. So Philip the apostle was still in Jerusalem. The other Philip was down in Samaria, and as was mentioned, they sent Peter and John down so that they could lay their hands on them, that they might receive these spiritual gifts. So a distinction that was made there, Philip was unable to do that since he was not an apostle. The Philip the apostle is always liable to be confused with Philip, who was one of the seven in Acts chapter 6. In point of fact, we know more about Philip of the seven than we know about Philip the apostle. It was the Philip of the seven who had the astonishingly successful campaign in Samaria and was the means of conversion of the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts 8:26-40. It was also this Philip with whom Paul stayed in Caesarea, Acts 21. The Philip who was one of the seven was a major figure in the missionary enterprise of the early church after the successful preaching of Philip in Samaria. Peter and John went down from Jerusalem to Samaria in order that they, through the laying on of the apostles' hands, the Samaritans might receive the Holy Spirit. Had this been Philip the apostle, the visit of the other apostles would not have been necessary. So looking at those qualifications and who could pass those spiritual gifts and how that was done, we can see that there were two different ones involved in that particular part of that. Right. Question 2, there are 4 lists of the new 12 apostles in the New Testament, and the references there. Who is always listed 5th? I'll give you a clue. It was Philip. And what may some say this suggests about Philip? This is me getting into a little bit of the speculation part of this, but there's some ideas about that. And it says in the 4 biblical lists of the 12 apostles, the 5th name on every list is Philip. As we noted in chapter 2, this apparently signifies that Philip was the leader of the second group of 4. As far as the biblical record is concerned, Philip plays something of a minor role compared to the 4 men in group 1, Peter, Andrew, James, and John. But nonetheless, is mentioned on several occasions, so he emerges from the larger group of 12 as a distinct character in his own right. Those comments from John MacArthur in the book 12 Ordinary Men. So there are those that put some significance on the order in which those are listed. That maybe goes back to the order in which in which Jesus called them to be apostles, although they were called to be disciples, sometime before that. But then when they were designated to be those 12. Where was Philip's hometown? Who else was from there? And what we know about this city historically? So where was he from?
Bethsaida.
All right, Bethsaida, not to be confused with Bethesda and Bethany and a couple of other cities that had somewhat similar names. And who else was from that city?
Peter and Andrew.
I'm sorry.
Peter and Andrew.
All right, yeah, Peter and Andrew were there, John chapter 1 and verse 44. And it was up on the Sea of Galilee, and that being this direction, there's Bethsaida right there on this particular map. What about this from a historical standpoint? Anybody find anything of interest there that you'd like to pass along?
It's a site of many miracles. And it was on the north side of the Sea of Galilee where the Jordan River flows into the sea. I wondered if that had to do with them having so many places for baptism.
All right, yeah, it was the home of the other two apostles. A couple of miracles that were significant that were there: the feeding of the 5,000 in Mark chapter 8, the healing of the blind man was near there in Mark chapter 8, down in verse 22. We talked about this a little bit last week, that Jesus criticized Bethsaida along with Capernaum and Chorazin for the lack of faith despite witnessing his miracles. And that's when a couple of the apostles wanted to call down fire from heaven on those three cities. And also Jesus walking on the water in Mark chapter 6 took place at the Sea of Galilee near there as well. So what does Bethsaida mean? Anybody see a definition of that or an explanation of the meaning of it?
House of fishing.
House of
Fishing.
fishing. So house of fishing. One said maybe house of the hunter. Again, those would have been somewhat similar. There's some difference of opinion about where this actually was. We don't know for sure, but it was enlarged, some say, by Philip the Petrarch, who called it Julius, after the emperor's daughter. There were three places that they thought it might have been, the ruins of it, up on the north side of the Sea of Galilee. A couple of them have kind of come a little more prominent than others in the archaeological digs. Et-Tel, E-T-T-E-L-L, was re-inhabited again about the 3rd century before Christ and continued on a lesser scale on into the 1st century. Then one thing said that archaeological excavations at the site have revealed fishing gear, including lead weights used for nets, as well as sewing needles for repairing fish nets. The findings indicate that most of the city's economy was based on fishing on the Sea of Galilee, but that could have probably been true for dozens of cities around there as well. They've also found some silver coins up there dating back like 140 years before Christ. Bronze coins from the time of Alexander, and one from Philip the Tetrarch, which would have tied in somewhat with the Bible times, because he was the son of Herod the Great and ruled until about 34 years after Christ was born. So Peter, Andrew, and John seem to be directed to Jesus by John the Baptist or by another. How does Philip come to know Jesus?
Jesus said to him, follow me, and he did.
All right. In John chapter 1, verse 43 through 45 said, the next day after he called Peter and Andrew, he proposed to go to Galilee, and he found Philip. And Jesus said to him, follow me. Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. And so immediately after this, question 5, What does Philip do?
He went to Nathanael and said, "We have found Jesus."
All right, he went to Nathanael and said, "We have found Jesus." How did he describe Jesus when he told when he told Nathanael about this?
Him of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote.
All right, it's more than just significant. Here's a man named Jesus. He said, "We found him who Moses in the law and the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." So, how does he respond to Nathanael's reluctance? Nathanael was reluctant to come at first. And what was Philip's response to him when Nathanael said, "Can any good thing come out of Nazareth?"
Come and see.
Come and see. Application from that, maybe a couple of things to think about. Why might our friends be more fertile soil in evangelism, just cold calling or door knocking with strangers? Apparently there was some relationship between these. Don't know of any family relationship, but friends, acquaintances, and enough that Philip wanted Nathanael to know this and to come see and to follow Jesus as well. So how can our relationship with our friends, what are some things that would cause that to be more beneficial to us than just making that cold call?
If you didn't know, wouldn't know how serious to take you or how you live, and not have a tendency to listen to you than just some stranger.
All right, I think you touched on an important part there. They should see how we're living and know what our life looks like. So that should help add some value to our words.
You would have trust. You would have trust in a friend that what they were saying was accurate or something at least to look into.
Okay. What else?
I think another application from this is not just the friend part of it, but when you're talking to somebody about Christ, it doesn't necessarily always have to be, if they're reluctant to maybe do a Bible study, just invite them to church, period, to just come and see what we do,
Yeah.
what we study. And that might be the best way to just get them in the Word, and get them interested.
Yeah, there are a lot of people that have the wrong impression about the Church of Christ, just like we may have the wrong impression about their faith, what they believe. One of the worst things we can do sometimes when trying to talk to somebody is, well, you believe this based on what we know about whatever denomination they might belong to. We need to be careful about doing that, but to ask them, find out what they believe. There are a lot of folks in some of the denominations that don't agree with their creed books or their conferences or whatever else. So just come see, let's study and look at this. But also our speech should show some humility, some love and respect, some truthfulness, some kindness as we try to talk to them about those kind of things. So Philip not only had a seeking heart, but he had the heart of a personal evangelist. His first response upon meeting Jesus was to find his friend Nathanael and tell him about the Messiah. Friendships provide the most fertile soil for evangelism. When the reality of Christ is introduced into a relationship of love and trust that has already been established, the effect is powerful. And it seems that invariably, when someone becomes a true follower of Christ, that person's first impulse is to want to find a friend and introduce that friend to Christ. That anyone who is forced to be a Christian is not a Christian. The choice must be made of their own volition. Philip was not overly forceful. He did not try to jam anything down Nathanael's throat. He just told Nathanael and let him decide for himself. In studying the conversions of the book of Acts, it is interesting to note that on many occasions the teacher just answered questions. This does not mean that we should not be proactive. In fact, we should be, but we should always remember a fundamental truth. A person who is pressured into something is a person who can be pressured out of something. Those who quit the faith often never had their own faith to start with, from Brian Nash in his book. So, pressuring somebody into this reminds you of the parable of the soil. the ones that spring up and then wither away or don't have a good foundation, and they fall away sometime after that. So that relationship with our friends, our life, our speech, our conduct, so many things that should be a reinforcement of the things that we try to show them, but we need to let them make those kinds of decisions themselves, and just do what we can to bring them along and teach them as we have the ability. And sometimes, we'll see this again a little further, just go find some help. Come on, let's see this. We'll go find someone who has more Bible knowledge than I do that can help us understand this passage. So there's certainly nothing wrong with that in bringing someone to someone who can help with things that they might need. Yes, sir.
I think this interaction is also a good example of, for us, of not arguing about things that aren't important. You know, Nathaniel's first reaction is to say, can anything good come out of Nazareth? And a lot of people had that reaction. And that wasn't what was important. What was important was what he was actually doing. And today, I feel like a lot of times we argue about things that aren't really the most important things, and we turn people off, and we get bogged down in that, and we should just be showing them, you know, what Jesus actually is. So I think that's a good lesson.
Yeah, right. But and that's right. And Nathaniel certainly laid out the groundwork for it when he first said this to him, and we have found him who Moses and the law and the prophets wrote. We see a lot of times where Jesus or some of the others began at some point in the person's life and started from there to help teach them the gospel. And so we can, I think, conclude from this that Nathaniel knew about the law. He knew about Moses and the prophets, because that's the basis with which Philip started talking to him about that. Right. Anything else through there? Philip had reasons to believe that he had found him of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote. In other words, he believed the prophecies about the Messiah were fulfilled in Christ. Prior to the death, burial, and resurrection, what might have some of these fulfillments been? What could have these men seen in Jesus and the things surrounding him that would have fulfilled the law of the prophets up until this point, before his actual crucifixion?
He was born in Bethlehem.
All right, born in Bethlehem. And
John the Baptist said, he said, the lame walk, the blind see, salvation is preached.
okay. They were not only born in Bethlehem, but being from Nazareth would have been a part of that as well. Here's a chart that's hard to read, harder than I thought it was going to be. It's one that Josh had in his slides. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bring forth a son, and you shall call his name Emmanuel. And then that fulfilled, of course, with Mary. And he has the passages there. Born in Bethlehem, as was mentioned. He was famed for his wisdom. Remember when he disappeared for 3 days after his family left Jerusalem, and they turned around and go back to find him. He was in the temple. That's not the passage that that Josh has up there. He increased in wisdom and stature and favor of God and man in Luke 2. But Jesus in the temple, answering the questions and having those discussions at a very mature level with the priests and the scribes, living a sinless life. He's healed the needy. He's preaching the good news. The triumphal entry into Jerusalem. So there were a number of things that he would have seen before this, maybe not all at this point where he was first called, but as seeing these, knowing something about Jesus and knowing the old law, he could have easily seen the fulfillment here, even though others rejected that Jesus was a fulfillment of those. Any others that you think of, you might mention there, some of the things that they could have seen in Jesus that would have helped convince Nathaniel or others that this was Christ? Question 7. In John 6:1-14 is a text that includes a few remarks about Philip, or from Philip. Why does Jesus ask Philip the question he does in John chapter 6, verses 5 and 6? And in verses 5 and 6, he said, "Therefore Jesus, lifting up his eyes and seeing the large crowd that was coming to him, said, 'Philip, where are we to buy bread so that these may eat?'" So why did Jesus ask him that question?
So it was to test him.
Right, it says he was testing him. In verse 6,
It would be testing his faith to where he would say, I believe you can take care of it.
all right.
I would think. Why are you asking me when you're the Lord?
How does Philip handle this test? What was his response?
He tells them what it would take to feed all those people.
Yeah, if we're going to get enough to feed all these people. Says he, from a physical standpoint, and this, it's interesting if you look at the, I've lost a note that I thought I had in here somewhere. If you look at kind of mix the two accounts of this, it says, sometimes it says they, Jesus said to them, or they did this, or they did that. But Philip certainly was the one here, no question about that Jesus directed this to, and he gave the answer. But what might Philip have seen before that would make him think, or could have reminded him, that Christ could take care of this? What kind of miracles? Yeah, the water to wine. That's probably the one that I would say is the best one of this, that he would have known about it, even if he hadn't seen it. We'll maybe get to a timeline a little bit about this as we go on here in a minute. But some argue that Philip was a process person who had trouble adapting to quick change. How can this mentality hurt the church at times of not being ready to adapt to change?
I put down that we can begin to overvalue our traditions.
All right.
Things that we've always done become what has to be done for the most important thing, and that might not be true.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest one. Is that, well, why are you going to change that? We've always done it like this. So some of those changing maybe the arrangements of the services, or even times of services, some of those sorts of things. But, what are some others that can cause us sometimes to have to adapt to change fairly quickly?
You might tend to limit yourself, like Philip said, hey, we'll have centered in there. I might even need more than that, so drop the conversation, we can't do it. The other flip side is you could rely on God and start working on something and see things happen that you didn't expect to happen.
Okay. A few things I put down here. The change of leadership, the addition of elders or loss of elders, change of evangelist sometimes can happen very quickly, and folks have to adjust to a different personality, a different situation there. One that would be even harder, maybe on a congregation, is the difference in doctrine and its application to the present situation. Certainly in the time that we're in right now, those questions about marriage, divorce, and remarriage, or homosexual relationships are ones that sometimes, because it affects a particular family, may cause members of that family to change their belief that they've had in order to try to excuse behavior of someone in the family. There sometimes questions about Bible authority. One thing that's kind of popular right now is the idea of, well, the Bible doesn't say I can't do it. Well, okay, but does it authorize it, and does it approve it? Because if it doesn't, then we can't just take the fact that the Bible says we can't do it. One that we all ought to be still very familiar with about all the changes during COVID-19. And we had to try to adapt to some safety and protocols and some restrictions that we had to deal with. So there are a number of things. We've had some difficult times here recently with loss of long-time members. Sometimes it might be the song leader. I grew up in a congregation where there was one guy that led singing just about all the time. And if something had happened to him, the congregation would have had to make some pretty sudden changes about that. Loss of a meeting facility. And we live in a spot that's known for having a few tornadoes along. What would we do if we were to lose our building here? Sometimes adapting to changes as the elders try to give us more opportunities to learn, to study. And think about things we've got here, the Golden Ages Club, the Extra Mile Club, the men's morning study, the women's morning study, the high school, the teen, the young adult classes, so these kind of things. And if folks that are interested in these and want to see those grow and prosper, but other people want to adapt to that change and be a part of those, then it's discouraging to those that are trying to accomplish some things with that. So there can be a number of things, but this ability to change is certainly an important one. What are the benefits that are there to facing moments of testing? Some of those passages up there, they're not fun, but what can be the good that comes out of those?
Make us stronger.
Make us stronger. Right.
Helps us to assess ourselves to make sure we're on the right path.
I'm sorry.
Helps so that we assess ourselves to make sure we're on the right path.
Okay, examine ourselves, make sure we're on the right path. They can certainly be a challenge that we have to be able to defend our faith sometimes against some of these changes that might come along. A couple of those passages, the idea of you have been distressed by various trials, so the proof of your faith may be found to result in praise and glory and honor. James 1:28, knowing that the trying of your faith produces endurance or patience. When we pray, ask in faith without doubting. It's in Psalm 139, try me and know my anxious thoughts. So we're about out of time. I want to skip a couple of questions here. Question 9. When the Greeks want to meet Jesus, who do they come to first? I'll give you a clue.
Philip.
It's Philip. All right. And what might this say about him?
He was approachable.
He was what? Personable?
Approachable.
Approachable. Okay. Yeah, that certainly would be important. And we need to be approachable. Folks not be afraid to ask us a question about what we believe or the things that we do in worship. What else?
That's some kind of good wisdom, right? Where he doesn't want to go to him and ask him for advice about going to the Greeks.
Okay. Somebody would be trusted to ask for advice. I think he was knowledgeable of Jesus. We need to be knowledgeable about the scriptures. He was willing to help. I think they might not have gone to him if they hadn't thought he was being willing to help. Here's all. And what does he do in response to this? When they ask him this, what does Philip do?
Goes and tells Andrew.
Okay, he takes them to Andrew. We aren't told why. This is one of those that I thought might have gotten into some speculation in some of the commentaries that said he was maybe unable to make a decision. He didn't know what to do with this. But if he was uncertain about this, why might he have been hesitant to take these Greeks to see Jesus?
You might have thought they had bad intentions.
Sorry.
You might have thought they could have had bad intentions.
All right. I did some little backing up through here to try to look at a bit of a timeline and think about the fact that when Jesus sent the 12 out in Mark chapter 10, he sent them to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And then That's in Mark 10, Matthew 10 and Mark 6. Then Mark chapter 6, a little bit later, the feeding of the 5,000. And then in John 12, so looking at a timeline, maybe moving along through here, it may be at that point that they had not seen the Greeks involved in this. And so it could have been that Peter said, well, I don't know about this because he sent us out to preach just to the house of Israel, and out here these Greeks wanting to do. So there's no real lesson that no reason that was given for that. But what can we use, what can we learn from some of these things that we talked about Philip and the others? Mel?
I look back at that chapter. Was it not the last week before Jesus was crucified? Was that not?
It was.
It's mentioned Lazarus and his resurrection and all that.
Yeah, it was sometime later when this took place. But again, trying to put the timelines together from the different parts of this are difficult. I certainly wouldn't disagree with that. We're just about out of time. I want to skip to I forget which slide it was now. I think it was these two here. What did Jesus think about Philip's statement, this about show me the Father? And have you ever felt like you made a foolish public statement or asked a dumb question? If you hadn't, you probably haven't talked very much in public. Is it comforting to know that the apostles asked questions that indicated their spiritual immaturity? And despite our moments of ignorance, what should be our goal? So as we're growing and developing, what should be our goal? To grow, to mature. Where have you been, Philip? Show us the Father. Clearly, Jesus thought that Philip should have known more by now. Let's not be too hard on them, though. We should always ask ourselves the question, am I where I should be in my knowledge and spiritual growth? We must constantly be growing. We must never be content to just plop down in a pew. Once again, we're impressed with the fact that God uses common, everyday people. Philip was not an intellectual giant, nor was he the poster child for self-confidence. He was just an everyday guy with doubts and fears and misunderstandings. So he was an apostle, but he had some of these same characteristics and traits that we can find in ourselves about having to grow and develop. If we were interviewing Philip for the role which Jesus called him, we might say, he's out. You can't make him one of the 12 most important people in the history of the world. But Jesus said, he's exactly what I'm looking for. Thankfully, the Lord uses people like Philip, lots of them. Tradition tells us that Philip was greatly used in the spread of the early church and was one of the first apostles to suffer martyrdom. By most accounts, he was put to death by stoning in Phrygia, Asia Minor, 8 years after the martyrdom of James. So in spite of the wonderful things that they did, the blessings that they had from being with Jesus, they were still people like we are, and we should not be discouraged if we think we can't live up to the standards and the things that they did. But we can do what we're able to do, and that's all that God's going to require of us.